Much is being written and said about the feud within the Democratic organization in Texas, but judging from receptions from President and Mrs. Kennedy, the political civil war hasn't stopped Texans from giving folks a hearty welcome. Take Fort Worth this morning in drizzling rain. Thousands gathered around the presidential hotel, many starting nearly 3 hours before the Kennedys were to come out. Last night, more than 4,000 were at the airport at midnight to see them land. In San Antonio and Houston, Texans were friendly, warm, and enthusiastic. After all, it was Mrs. Kennedy's first trip to Texas, and Texans like to make big impressions, perhaps because of their morbid fear of things too small. For instance, no matter how big he is, every Texan says he stands tall. Some Goldwater signs and anti-Kennedy slogans have dotted the landscape. One sign in Houston read, "We need another ex-president," and overhead an airplane towed a streamer saying, "Coexistence is surrender." Of the 5 towns on this trip, only San Antonio went Kennedy in 1960. The president wants to change that in 1964, and he and the vice president and their wives are making the first of several trips to this state before next year's election. The president is speaking in Republican Dallas this afternoon, and tonight he goes before a party fundraising dinner, which the White House grinningly describes as the only political stop on this non-political tour. This is Sid Davis with the presidential party in Texas. Speaking in Dallas, the heartland of conservative Texas Republicanism, President Kennedy this afternoon took aim at Senator Goldwater and his followers, accusing them of talking plain nonsense to the nation. The president did not mention Goldwater by name, but it was clear from his words that he was offering spirited debate to the principles advanced by the senator at one time or another. The president's audience included businessmen, scholars from the Graduate Research Center here, and civic leaders. Mr. Kennedy was not unaware that a month ago, UN Ambassador Stevenson spoke here and later received a somewhat hostile, if not dangerous, reception from right-wing demonstrators. Looking out over his audience, Mr. Kennedy said, "There will always be dissident voices heard in the land, expressing opposition without alternatives, finding fault but never favor, perceiving gloom on every side, and seeking influence without responsibility." Borrowing a phrase, Mr. Kennedy said, "We cannot expect that everyone will talk sense to the American people, but," he said, "we can hope fewer people will listen to nonsense." Then the president went on to explain the complexities of life and survival in the 60s. And despite it all, he said, under his administration, this country is second to none militarily and economically. He told of our superior weapons and stockpiles, our 70 million employed, and listed other achievements of his 1,000 days in office. With a stunningly dressed Mrs. Kennedy at his side, the president has been warmly greeted in Texas, where the exposure is designed not to hurt his vote-getting chances next year. This is Sid Davis in Dallas.
Good 10 seconds and try to give me a as calm as you can, whatever you know.
Right.
Okay?
Right. This is Sid Davis, and I'm at the Dallas Trademark, where President Kennedy was to make a major address this afternoon. The word is now being passed throughout the House that President Kennedy has been shot and has been taken to the Parkland Hospital near here. The only information we have at the present time is that the president was fired upon as his car approached a cloverleaf to go onto a freeway to come to the Dallas Trademark for his speech. According to reporters who were closer to the president, Mrs. Kennedy is supposed to have said, "My God." The reporters did notice that the president's body did fall limp. Governor John Connally of Texas and the president are in the hospital. Their conditions at this moment are unknown. This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas, This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas Trademark in Dallas, Texas. This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas Trade Mart, a gigantic and beautiful building for public exhibition, where the word is just now being passed to several hundred persons sitting at their noon luncheon tables that President Kennedy has been shot. We have no information on the president's condition. We do know that he has been taken, along with Governor John Connally of Texas, to the hospital nearby. The president arrived in Dallas a short while before the incident took place. There were large and happy crowds on the streets. It was a clear day, the sun shining, not a cloud in the sky. There were several hundreds of thousands of persons that lined the streets from the airport to where the incident took place. Crowds were very thick during the noon hour downtown. The shooting took place at about 12:30 as the president's open convertible with Mrs. Kennedy sitting next to him approached a cloverleaf going onto a freeway that would eventually take him to the Trade Mart. We noticed, riding behind the president, that suddenly the president's car sped ahead with a tremendous burst of speed. Then Secret Service men began to run. By then the car was out of sight. We could not see it. But local policemen started running over a hill toward the cloverleaf and up onto a railroad track trestle that crosses over that superhighway. We have arrived at the Trade Mart now. We are awaiting word from the hospital on the president's condition. At the moment, we have no additional information. This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas Trade Mart in Dallas, Texas.
How about thinking the other one?
Hello.
Sid, stand by a second.
What do you hear?
Sid?
Just a minute.
Jim Snyder here. I'm going to ask Sid Davis some questions in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, Jim, turn your monitor down just a little bit more. You'll still be able to hear Sid.
And the president.
Okay, Charlie, I turned it down. Say something.
Okay, I'm talking to you.
Okay.
Okay. Sid?
Yes?
Okay, you and Jim are set to go for recording for a two-way.
All right.
Let me hit the hold button on my phone and you're on your way.
All right.
Sid, can you give us as complete a description as you can of the events leading up to the attempt on the president's life? Hello, Sid. Hello, Sid.
Sid?
Yes?
Yeah, Jim's apparently not talking to you on the phone also. Jim, he's on the beat line. I can't feed into the beat line.
I don't hear
Okay,
anything,
all
Charlie.
right, Charlie, I goofed. I didn't pick up the phone. I'm sorry. All right, Sid, I'm going to start right now.
All right, go.
Sid, can you give us as completely as possible a rundown on the events that led up to the attempt on the president's life?
Well, Jim, we're coming in from Love Field in Dallas. There was a very warm reception out there, about 3,000 or 4,000 people, mostly young people, cheering and very enthusiastic over the president and Mrs. Kennedy's arrival. And Mrs. Kennedy and the president walked over to shake hands with these people in the crowd. Most of them were young people. Then the motorcade proceeded into Dallas. It's about a 12-mile ride into Dallas, and it took about 30 minutes. And as we got closer into town, the crowds became very large and very warm and friendly. They were not wildly cheering, but they were enthusiastic. And there were very few, if any, heckling type of signs. Most of the signs welcomed the president. We got through town, and as we were leaving the end of the downtown section, heading toward an approach onto a freeway, this is sort of a cloverleaf, we were on the press bus, I would say about 10 cars behind the president. We noticed a sudden burst of speed on the president's car. The car just shot forward, and local policemen who had been standing guard along the route then started to run. And one reporter said that he heard 3 shots being fired, but we were not sure that they might have been a car backfiring. But suddenly we noticed local police running to the top of this cloverleaf where a railroad trestle appears to pass. The president's car was going under this overpass at the time.
What kind of a car was the president riding
He
in?
was riding in his open midnight blue Lincoln Continental convertible. Mrs. Kennedy was with him along with Governor Connally and Mrs. Connally.
That's the bubble top car.
Right, this is the bubble top that carries a plexiglass top. Jim, I'm standing in the Trade Mart where the president was supposed to speak, and announcements are now being made to the people. A hush went through this crowd here when they first learned the president had been shot, and I just noticed a man walking by me with his wife. His wife was limp, hearing the news that the president had been shot. He was escorting her out of the building. She was very pale. Just a man and woman who live here in Dallas. The announcement is now being made to the people from the podium, and I'm trying to pick that up. Stand by. The music has stopped. They were playing an organ during this luncheon program. The president was to deliver a luncheon speech before a group of businessmen, some people who study here at the Advanced Research Institute, and some civic leaders. But now that the announcement has been made, the music has stopped here in the hall. No one is saying a word. People are starting to filter out very quietly. Some are coming over here near the telephones to find out if anyone has any word on the condition of the president and Governor Connolly, as well as their wives.
Sid, have you been able to talk to anyone who was fairly close to the scene, and what happened?
We were, I would say, in the press bus about 10 cars behind, and then they have your pool reporters, those reporters who are able to ride a little forward of us, who reported hearing 3 shots, and they have practically confirmed now that there were 3 shots being fired, as if they came from an automatic type of weapon.
Did the president collapse in the car, or what?
Well, as we understand it, the president fell forward, and so did Governor Connolly, and we were also told that bullet marks or wounds were visible on the white shirt of Governor Connolly on his chest. This is what we've been told so far. Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Connolly are at the hospital. It's about 5 minutes from the Trade Mart.
Were Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Connolly in the same car with the president and the governor?
Yes, I mentioned that, and they did not appear to be hit, although we are not at this moment sure of anything, because almost a complete chaos has now taken place. The White House staff people are trying to arrange press tables, telephones, etc., to get the story out, and the emergency room here, as you know, is very busy.
What is the latest word you have heard on the president's condition?
We have only the word that the president has been shot. This is all the information we have at the present time. The president's car, after this incident took place, just shot forward in a tremendous burst and headed right for the hospital. It passed the Trade Mart completely by, and this is the first indication we got that something serious, actually serious, had happened.
When the shooting took place, Sid, was the president's car just cruising along? Were the Secret Service men running along beside it as they usually do?
That's right. The Secret Service, there was a Secret Service car. We call that the Queen Mary. It follows the president's car immediately behind. It's a great big large Cadillac convertible, about 10 or 12 years old, and Secret Servicemen ride its running boards. It has running boards. There are Secret Servicemen alongside the running boards and inside the car. And these men, of course, are helpless when you have a sniper-type situation, as we did have today. In that Secret Service car, they carry a Tommy gun that is a rapid-fire repeating type of weapon, and I've seen it many times being placed in the car when we get off the president's plane. It's carried in a black bag, but apparently this time they never got a chance to use the automatic weapon. It is usually on the floor in the rear seat of the Queen Mary as the Secret Service follow the president.
Okay, Sid, well, you're on your way to the hospital now, right?
I'm on the way to the hospital now, Jim. We'll try to keep you posted.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Sid.
Everyone in Washington, like Americans everywhere, is stunned by the news of the assassination attempt on President Kennedy this afternoon in Dallas. When the news came, the House was adjourned, but the Senate was in session debating a bill. Majority Leader Mike Mansfield was called to a Senate cloakroom telephone and told the news. Mansfield paused and said, "This is terrible, I can't find words." Senate Minority Leader Dirksen was then called to the phone, and when he heard the news, he said, "Oh God, this is the most distressing thing that could ever happen. I am shocked." On a motion by Mansfield, the Senate recessed at 1:55 p.m. to wait for further developments in the presidential shooting. Senator Wayne Morris of Oregon told the Senate just before it recessed, after hearing the tragic news, that if ever there was an hour to pray, this is the hour all Americans should. During the quorum call, Mansfield and Dirksen went to the Senate Democratic cloakroom, apparently to call the White House. Senators who had watched the news tickers off the Senate chamber drifted onto the floor and huddled in groups talking. When Mansfield and Dirksen returned, Morris withdrew his quorum call request and said, "If ever there is an hour when all of us should pray, this is the hour." Mansfield then made 2 routine moves dealing with the legislative program for today and next week and recessed the Senate pending developments. Jim Snyder, Washington.
The Vice President has gone into seclusion. There is no information as yet as to whether he has taken the oath or on arrangements for the presidential oath for Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was also not wounded. Here at the hospital, groups of people stand by outside, young girls who 2 hours ago were cheering wildly the arrival of the young president and his stunning wife, are now wiping tears from their eyes. People are walking through the hospital corridors here in disbelief. It's hard to believe. You hear the word, "oh dear," spoken so many times. A few minutes ago, Father Oscar Huber, the pastor of the Holy Trinity Catholic Church, in which this hospital, and with whose parish this hospital is located, administered to the president the last rites. There are several clergymen, Catholic clergymen, in the building. The president did receive the last rites of the church. We do not know whether the last rites came prior to his death. I'm now going to check for just a moment. Would you please stand by? I'm going to check for just a moment to see if there's any additional information. There's nothing on. There is nothing additional on the vice president's oath-taking or Mrs. Kennedy's departure. We do not have information here at the hospital because of the chaotic situation and the shock of this whole tragic incident on whether the assassin has been apprehended. We understand that the shock that took the president's life came from a building downtown known as the State Book Depository Building, and the Secret Service men were seen gathered around there. I talked to a young man, Charles Hodge, 17 years old, who is a senior in high school here in Dallas, and he was taking pictures of the motorcade as it rounded the cloverleaf to head onto the freeway where the incident took place. And he said that he saw Mrs. Kennedy lean over the president and saw Governor Connolly slump in the seat of their open Lincoln Continental convertible. This whole incident has been very tragic. Ironically, it comes at a time when the president was about to address a group of civic fathers here in Dallas. The incident also follows a rather embarrassing situation of a month ago when UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson was not only struck with a placard by a demonstrator, but was also spat upon. The Secret Service is handling the apprehension of the assassin. We have no additional information at this time, Jim, but I would be glad to answer any questions you have.
Sid, have you been able to talk to any of the Secret Service men?
No, Secret Service men are not saying anything at the moment. The police affair, the police part of this incident is handled several miles from here at the hospital. Mrs. Kennedy at last report is in the hospital. She was seen walking down one of the corridors being escorted by another woman, and might have been Mrs. Connell.
Is Vice President, or rather I should say now, President Lyndon Johnson in the hospital?
No, Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital. Lyndon Johnson has gone into seclusion. The Secret Service will not divulge his whereabouts, or will the White House at this time announce the oath-taking. And that is the situation at this moment.
Now, in the motorcade, Sid, when the shooting took place, Mr. Johnson was in the car behind President Kennedy, as we understand it.
That's right. He was in the car behind the president, and could not have been hit if there was not a spray. Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was also 2 cars behind the president, told me when I asked him what he saw, he said, "It's too horrible to describe. They were seriously hurt." This is, of course, before we had been informed that the president is dead.
Well, now, the president was shot when? About 12:30 Dallas time?
That's right. That would have been 1:30 your time. The shooting incident took place at about 12:30 Dallas time during the noon hour after coming through the downtown section. It was a brilliant sunny day, and hundreds of thousands of people turned out. And we were taking notes on the bus about the crowd and the welcome signs, some of the signs in politics that were not so welcome. But it was a cheerful crowd, an enthusiastic crowd, and they were happy to see the president and Mrs. Kennedy. She was dressed in a sort of a raspberry-colored two-piece suit, as I recall, and her traditional pillbox hat. And the president had on his blue pinstripe, which he is so fond of and wears many times in Washington. And he was seen to slump over the seat. Mrs. Kennedy then
tried to grasp him or grab him, and we were told from perhaps a Secret Service man secondhand that he said, "Oh my God, he's been shot." But we don't have that official. No one as yet can verify those words. It's too early.
Well, part of this tragedy is that the Kennedy visit to Texas was going very well. It had been a happy affair. The president spoke this morning outside the hotel in Fort Worth and was in good humor.
Absolutely, Jim. He was in tremendous spirits this morning and all through the trip, and both he and Jackie seemed to be enjoying themselves. I rode with the president last night. I was on the president's plane last night coming into Fort Worth, and it was about midnight, and he seemed to be in very good spirits. It's been a tremendously trying day for him. He came into the cabin. He came into the forward cabin of the plane where the reporters sit, and he smiled and walked back into his cabin, and Mrs. Kennedy did the same. It's just they just came in briefly, and then they retired to the presidential suite, which is in the rear of the Air Force One, which is the president's plane. But they were in tremendous spirits last night, and then this morning the president was up early to talk to a group of people outside the outside the hotel in the parking lot. And Fort Worth was very warm to him, and he was happy. And it was only an 8-minute flight from Fort Worth to Dallas, and it was only 45 minutes or so after we had gotten into Dallas that this took place. The commotion you hear in the background, if at all you can hear it, are additional telephones now being brought in for emergency press rooms that are being set up. Telephones in this hospital are at a premium, and we're fortunate to have commandeered this one, although there are many people standing in line.
Well, where are you exactly in the hospital?
What you might call the administrator's office, right near the press room. I am probably 30 yards or so from the emergency entrance where the president's body is or was at the last time I had checked.
Well, from the time sequence, Sid, he was shot at 12:30 Dallas time and died at 1 p.m. He really could not have lived very long once he arrived at the hospital.
No, he was mortally wounded. He lived about a half hour, and the word that we had gotten at first was that the top surgeons, neurological surgeons from around the country were being alerted, but it was too late. The president was fatally injured, and there was no chance apparently to save him. The hospital is only 4 blocks from where he was to speak, so getting to the hospital was not the problem. The president, the sniper's bullet had hit a very fine mark. As I said, and I would like to repeat, the very terse announcement, which will now, of course, become part of history. The announcement, as read, as read to us, is that John F. Kennedy died at 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time today in Dallas from a gunshot wound in the brain.
And that was the extent of the announcement?
We have no information on the assassination of the assassin. That was the extent of the announcement, and then the questions followed. The questions asking, where is the vice president, who is now, of course, the president? When will he take his oath? Where is Mrs. Kennedy? What will she do? And the answers to those questions are that Mr. Kennedy will return to Washington. The vice president is at a location which the Secret Service will not disclose at this time, and that Governor Connolly, who was also hit, is in satisfactory condition. And that Mrs. Kennedy is, I suppose, trying to do her best under these circumstances, although we have no word. It wouldn't surprise me at all if perhaps members of the family might try to come out here or find their way to meet her someplace. This whole trip is very strange. The reporters sometimes are allowed to have premonitions, and I didn't have any, so I will not say that I did. But when you are riding a press bus or when you are riding behind the president, as often as we have in our bureau, I think many times you think how easy it is if someone really wants to kill someone. It is not a very difficult job, and there are many buildings, high buildings, places where people can hide, and it is impossible to get enough policemen or enough Secret Servicemen to watch everybody. And we have lost other presidents in our history, and John F. Kennedy is one of those victims. Died in about the 1,000th day of his administration. He was about to speak in Dallas to a large group of people about some of the accomplishments of his administration, some of the goals this country must reach in the next 10 or so years. The president was a man, I believe, watching him, who had a great sense of history. He loved the military. He loved pomp, the military band, music. He would stop the motorcade as he did here today, shortly before his death, to shake a few hands, to chat with some people and say, how are you? To talk to them. Mrs. Kennedy seemed to be enjoying herself. It is a shock. I believe that I think even the most hardened reporter, and I don't think there are many, would not be moved by the loss of a president of this country. And my own personal feelings, if I might impose on you and those people listening, are that it is a very tragic day for this country. And it is also very hard to talk about it. I was perhaps 10 vehicles behind the president's car with the rest of the White House press. And we noticed motion up ahead, but the president's car had gone around the bend. We noticed that there was sudden surge of speed in the president's car, and police began running. And then we knew something had happened, and we started to recall sounds, and there was the sound of perhaps 1, 2, or 3 shots. Now we are told there probably were 3 shots, indicating that a repeater weapon might have been fired.
Did the thought go through your mind at that time, Sid, that there might have been an assassination attempt?
At the moment, not right away, because the president has a habit of wanting to stop his car, and so the Secret Service will always rush forward to go to the car and protect him and Mrs. Kennedy if the crowd is too rowdy. At that moment, no, and then all of a sudden, I think in unison, everybody felt that something terrible had happened. And we were on a big bus and with 50 or so White House reporters and trying to get the bus driver to move faster. We couldn't. The bus just wouldn't go faster. And we noticed the president's car had left the motorcade on the way to the trademark where he was supposed to speak. And we pulled into the trademark minus the president's car, which was even more suspicious. Then we knew something happened. And then you can imagine 50 reporters charging through this hall, and perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 people gathered, and luncheon tables set in white tablecloths, silverware, and dinnerware, waiting for the president's arrival, and an organ playing, and these reporters running like a herd through the hall saying, what happened? Let's try to find out where the president's car disappeared to. And then the first words start coming back from those who might have been closer, the officials in cars closer, that the president was shot, the governor was shot. And the hush went through the hall at that time. But the music played because most of the people did not know at that time what had happened. And people talked to each other, and you could see them. And I noticed several women walking out limp, leaning on their husbands in the support, not able to believe what they had been told. It was very hard for us to believe it. We had seen this man in many motorcades. In Costa Rica, in Europe, Bermuda, in Nassau, where crowds might have been perhaps somewhat more hostile than they are at home. But this was not a hostile crowd today. It was an enthusiastic one. It was friendly.
Did you see any very unfriendly signs in the crowd?
There were a couple. One said Goldwater for president. This is traditional all over the country whenever you're coming into a presidential year. The men who are mentioned as possible contenders are always have supporters. Someone said, I do not agree with your socialistic policies, Mr. Kennedy. Dallas is the home of great Republican conservative strength, and it is not unusual for these many people here to have views opposite the president. There are residents of this town who perhaps are a little more vociferous, a little more vehement, a little more volatile, as was demonstrated when Adlai Stevenson was here not many weeks ago and encountered some rather hostile people who chose to demonstrate physically rather than with signs and passively. So, yes, there were some signs, but there were some signs in San Antonio and some signs in Houston, and there are signs in New York. This is part of the great game of American politics. Apparently, some twisted mind perhaps let some of us go too far. So we have the tragedy we have today. This is all like, this is a commentary, of course, but this is the best I can, the best words I can use to describe what has taken place in my own personal feelings. I feel compelled almost to interpret what I think happened in downtown Dallas today, where it will live for many, many years.
Sid, are there members of the White House staff there at the hospital? Have you seen?
We have been in contact with Malcolm Kilduff. Malcolm Kilduff is the Associate Press Secretary to Mr. Pierre Salinger. Mr. Salinger has gone on to Tokyo from Honolulu, where he met with Dean Rusk and Ambassador Lodge for a trade meeting with Japan. I'm sure Mr. Salinger will be en route to the United States immediately on hearing this news.
Was Larry O'Brien along on this trip?
No, I have here with me, and I hope he won't give up any of his notes, but I have here standing in front of me, taking notes, a gentleman of the press who has been around the White House for many years, Chuck Roberts, is taking notes here. And I don't know whether he has found out anything about the Vice President's whereabouts at this moment. Mr. Roberts, at least we tell the Vice President that he is going back to Washington. This is the same word we've heard.
There's no word yet on when the President's body will be returned to Washington.
No, it's far too early. The President expired 55 minutes ago, Jim. And it is far too early for us at this time to find out this information. Of course, it's very complex. The announcement to us, as best I can recall, the announcement to us that the President was dead was made at 1:35 Central Standard Time, 35 minutes afterward. And Mr. Kilduff, who made the announcement, could barely speak the word. General Clifton, the President's military aide, was in there. He's in a state of shock. The man, I looked to him and I talked to him and said, "What do you hear?" And he just looked at me. He had already had the news. The President's military aides traveled with him all the time, and General Clifton was the senior aide who gave the President his daily military intelligence briefing every day.
Well, Sid, thank you very much for this fine report. We'll be checking back with you very soon, so you can continue to cover developments for us.
Yes, I will, Jim. I have, as I said, we will try to get the thing to you as soon as we can. As you can understand, no hospital in the world could have been, no hospital staff in the world could have been set for such an emergency, and trying to provide information. I'm sure the medical facilities here were the best available in Dallas, and there was just nothing that could have been done for so serious a wound.
All right, Sid, thank you very much for your report.
Right.
Again, this is Jim Snyder in Washington. Here with me is Ann Corick, a veteran correspondent on the Washington scene, who I have given the rather unhappy assignment of telling what happens when a president is assassinated or dies in office as far as the organization of government is concerned. Ann?
Well, of course, the man who now assumes the great burdens of the presidency is the Vice President, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson is 55 years old. He was born near Johnson City, Texas, a town founded by his grandfather, which has quite a heavy German population. Lyndon Johnson has a ranch near there called the LBJ Ranch, and ironically, President and Mrs. Kennedy had planned to spend overnight at the LBJ Ranch tonight to rest up from their Texas trip. Lyndon Johnson suffered a heart attack in 1955, but he cut out smoking after that and cut down his working schedule a little bit and has been in excellent health ever since then. He has a wife affectionately called Lady Bird Johnson and two teenage daughters, Linda Bird, who is 19, and Lucy Baines, who is 16. Johnson came into politics early in his life. He came to Washington as an aide to a congressman from Texas. And in 1937, he was elected as a congressman to serve in the House in a special election. He was elected to the Senate in 1948 in a very close election, which hinged on about 87 votes. Johnson is a member of the Christian Church. However, his wife and daughters are Episcopalians, and he most often attends the National Cathedral or All Saints Episcopal churches with them here in Washington. Johnson had wanted to be president for some time. He was a favorite son candidate for the Democratic nomination in 1956. It wasn't considered a serious effort on his part. But in 1960, he was serious, and he fought John Kennedy very, very deeply about it. He set up headquarters early in the year of 1960, campaigned very heavily and strongly and determinedly for it. And
back a flood of memories about Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy in 1960. I remember the day at the Democratic Convention before Mr. Kennedy had won the nomination, when Lyndon Johnson invited candidate Kennedy to come before the Texas delegation. And this was real tough, rough, competitive politics, where Mr. Johnson felt that he was going to at least get an edge on this young man who was trying to block his presidential aspirations. And that was quite a challenge for Mr. Kennedy, and I remember distinctly his appearing before that Texas caucus and handling himself in such a way that it really backfired on Mr. Johnson, and it was kind of a victory for Kennedy. And it was just the next day, I believe, that Kennedy got the nomination on the first ballot. And then the next morning, the morning after the nomination of John F. Kennedy, was that famous meeting between Kennedy and Johnson, when Kennedy asked the man he had defeated for the presidency to be his vice presidential candidate. And I guess you would agree that that set off the greatest bout of soul-searching that Lyndon Johnson ever went through. He consulted with Sam Rayburn, his mentor, and now, as history will, it brings things around to a very different situation. For Lyndon Johnson, we don't know exactly where he is, but he's sitting somewhere contemplating the prospect of being sworn in as the President of the United States, succeeding the late John F. Kennedy. And who does the swearing in now? It has to be a member of the Supreme Court.
yes, it does, Jim. The Chief Justice, if he's available.
Was it possible that they would fly a Chief Justice or a Justice of the Court to Dallas, because there is a desire to have any gap in the succession? The country cannot be without a formal president.
Yes, I believe the law also makes provision in the event that a member of the Supreme Court is not available, that a suitable official may undertake that task of swearing in a new president.
Well, the story of the assassination of John F. Kennedy continues to unfold. This has been a special report from Washington and from Dallas, Texas. Our correspondent, Sid Davis, who was on the scene of the assassination. I will be checking back with you from time to time to keep you posted as the story unfolds. This is Jim Snyder with Ann Court in Washington. Just moments ago, a plane left the Dallas airport carrying the body of the President and Mrs. Kennedy. We were informed by our correspondent, Sid Davis, who was in Dallas today with the President, that he is one of 3 reporters who have been chosen to ride on that plane back to Washington. They have already taken off by this time. The last opportunity I had to talk to Sid, he was not certain on the whereabouts of Vice President Lyndon Johnson. However, there was a possibility that Mr. Johnson would be on that plane too, and because Malcolm Kilduff, the Assistant White House Press Secretary, had informed reporters that Mr. Johnson would be sworn in a very short time, it raises the possibility that Mr. Johnson might be sworn in as the new President of the United States on that plane, making its very somber journey back to Washington. Now, we have been checking with the Supreme Court and other government agencies here in Washington on the procedure for swearing in a new president, especially when the death of the old president came so quickly. And Ann Corick has a report on that that procedure. Ann?
Jim, the Supreme Court says as of now they have no information whatsoever to give out to us on when the new president will be sworn in. However, Chief Justice Warren is in the Supreme Court building and has been there all day. So the Chief Justice, as of 15 minutes ago, was still in Washington. As you recall, history records that there was a president who was sworn in by his own father, although normally the law says that new presidents should be sworn in by either the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or another justice on the court. But Calvin Coolidge was sworn in at his home in Plymouth, Vermont, after the death of President Harding on August 3rd, 1923, by his father. His father was a justice of the peace. 15 days later, Coolidge again took the oath before a justice of the Supreme Court in Washington. If you also recall, Harry Truman was sworn in at the White House by Chief Justice Harlan Stone within hours after the death of President Roosevelt on April 12, 1945.
Traumatic experience that was for him. And this brings to mind a rumor story. It turned out to be a bad rumor story out of Dallas that Vice President Johnson had suffered a heart attack on hearing the news of the assassination of Mr. Kennedy. However, that report has been completely discredited. Vice President Johnson has not suffered a heart attack, and the word we have is that in a very short time, possibly at this moment, he is being sworn in as the new President of the United States. There has been some all kinds of reaction here in Washington, and we have just received word of a statement by Senator Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania, Republican Senator of Pennsylvania. And Ann will give us this statement in a moment, but I think Senator Scott reflects the kind of thinking that everyone has to have as soon as they can get over the initial shock of hearing that a very young and vigorous man like John F. Kennedy has been cut down by an assassin. Ann, could you give us Senator Scott's statement?
This is a statement from Senator Scott, a Republican who has waged many political battles with the late president. He says, "The whole nation shares the grief of the family of John F. Kennedy in the assassination of the president. John Kennedy served his country well and died in its service. Our hearts are heavy and our hearts are bowed. Our love and sympathy encompass his bereaved family. We have lost a leader and a friend. The Republic still stands. The assassin killed a man, not the presidency. We must all rally around the new President of the United States in this time of national crisis and pray for the health, strength, and well-being of President Lyndon B. Johnson. We must give him our understanding and help."
Very fine statement from Senator Scott of Pennsylvania. Part of the story that has evolved here in Washington is the other members of the Kennedy family who are located here in Washington. Very ironic that the Senate was in session at the time the news was received of the death of the president. And presiding in the chair of the United States Senate was Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, the president's brother. And Senator Wayne Morris, when he heard this news, immediately interrupted the proceedings. Senator Winston Crowley, Republican of Vermont, was making a speech on the business at hand, and Senator Morris interrupted him to ask for an emergency quorum call. And Senator Spessard Holland, Democrat of Florida, quickly took over the presiding officer's chair from Ted Kennedy, and Kennedy left the chamber. He rushed from the Capitol building immediately after the word of the shooting had reached him, and an aide to Senator Daniel Inouye, a Democrat of Hawaii, gave him a lift in his car to the Senate office building. The doors of Senator Kennedy's office were locked, and knocks went unanswered, as did phone calls. We understand that Senator Kennedy and the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, with their wives, are on their way to Hyannisport to be with their parents, the parents of the late president, Mr. Joseph Kennedy, and Mrs. Rose Kennedy. There are stories all over Washington of shock at the news of the events in Dallas this afternoon. Speaker McCormick, the House of Representatives, was eating lunch in the House dining room when he was told about it. And he said, "This is terrible, terrible." And later he said, "All Americans of whatever religious conviction will pray for the President and Governor Connally." A reference to Governor Connally, of course, because the governor was shot too. However, he has survived, is reported to be in fair condition in the same hospital in which the President died. Also, Speaker McCormick said, my God, what are we coming to?" Carl Albert, the majority leader in the House, the Democratic majority leader, was seen to have tears in his eyes, and he went and sat in McCormick's office with the Speaker.
I may point out at this time, Jim, that although Speaker McCormick was loyal and faithful to President Kennedy in their legislative battles, reportedly they had a personal disagreement which they covered over but never completely resolved. Speaker McCormick, it is said, became a little irritated with the late President Kennedy when Mr. Kennedy first went to the House of Representatives as a young congressman and tried to upset the seniority system. But since that time, Speaker McCormick has been very faithful to him.
In the Senate, after the word was received and Senator Edward Kennedy left the chamber, the Senate was quickly recessed, pending further developments. But reporters who were there report that many of the senators remained slumped in their seats on the floor and just stunned. And Senator Richard Russell, Democrat of Georgia, said the whole nation was shocked by this dastardly crime. After a 15-minute recess, the Senate returned and had the Reverend Frederick Brown Harris, the Senate chaplain, say a prayer. And the Senate adjourned. After the chaplain's prayer, President Kennedy's life may still be spared. Now, at that time, the President had not expired. The members of the Senate had only the information that he had been shot and had been taken to a hospital. Now, of course, the reaction to such a dastardly thing is not confined to Washington or this country. Our reporters in Europe are filing in with reports of reaction overseas. First, we have this report from our European Bureau Chief, Rod McLeish, in London.
In spasms of shock, then horror, then unsurpassed grief, Europe heard tonight of President Kennedy's shooting, last moments, and death. The mixture of emotions is too vast and volcanic here tonight to do more than simply note the ways in which it is expressed. Pope Paul hurrying to his private chapel to pray for the President in the last moments of his life. A Dutch diplomat saying, "My God, how could it have happened?" And a British diplomat saying, "My God, what happens now?" Today was French President Charles de Gaulle's 73rd birthday, and he, so full of life, was swift to express his grief and horror at the violent death of the young American president. Across the dark of Europe, a newscaster broke into the program of the U.S. Armed Forces Radio to tell American soldiers abroad of their president's passing, and he was heard to sob as he gave the news. Here in Britain, the BBC abruptly terminated all programs on its television network, and over the picture of a spinning globe played the dolorous chords of Brahms' tragic overture. In Spain, General Franco was interrupted at a cabinet meeting with the news that Mr. Kennedy had been shot. The Spanish government praised for his quick recovery, said a spokesman, but by that time, Mr. Kennedy was dead. Rod McLeish, London.
We just have a bulletin from the Associated Press that Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States at about 1:38 p.m. Central Standard Time today. That would be 2:38 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The oath was administered by U.S. District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. Repeating that, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States at about 1:38 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2:38 Eastern Standard Time. The oath was administered by U.S. District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. That means that Mr. Johnson was sworn in just 38 minutes after the death of President Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy passed away in the hospital in Dallas at exactly 1 o'clock. Continuing our reaction from overseas, we have this report from our Berlin correspondent, Ed DeFontaine.
The assassination of President Kennedy has shaken Berlin and its population to its roots. West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt was barely able to speak when notified of the president's death, and Evangelical Bishop of Berlin, Otto de Belius, expressed his grief at hearing the news. Berliners on the street were unable to believe reporters when they were approached with the news that Mr. Kennedy, who visited this city in June, was dead at the hands of an assassin. The United States Commandant in Berlin, Major General James Polk, who immediately went to the emergency command center of his headquarters in Berlin on hearing the news, said that he was shocked beyond words. General Polk, like others who were contacted, appeared close to tears on hearing of the president's death. The radio and the television programs in West Berlin and West Germany are devoting their entire program to the news and to programs of somber music. Only in East Berlin were the programs unchanged, although communist news broadcasts carried the bulletins. West German Chancellor Ludwig Erhard is on his way back to Bonn from France, and in his absence, Vice Chancellor Erich Mende sent the first telegram of condolence from West Germany to the United States. This is Ed DeFontaine reporting from Berlin.
Repeating the information we gave you before hearing Mr. DeFontaine's report, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president at 2:38 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon. The oath was administered by U.S. District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. Johnson took the oath aboard the presidential plane, and the plane was parked at the Dallas Love Field. Now, from that information, I gather that Mr. Johnson is flying on the same plane with Mrs. Kennedy and the body of the president, which was placed in a casket at the hospital and carried out to the airport. As I said earlier, our Group W correspondent, Sid Davis, who was in Dallas covering the president's activities today, is one of 3 reporters assigned to fly to Washington on that plane. So Sid Davis was on hand as the new president boarded the plane to come back to Washington. Mr. Johnson becomes the 36th president of the United States, and he is the 8th vice president to assume the presidency through the death of a president. Now, the FBI, part of this story is what happens to the man who shot President Kennedy and wounded the governor of Texas today. As of this moment, he has not been apprehended, but you can be certain that one of the most intensive searches in the history of this country is being carried on at this moment to apprehend him. And you have details on that.
Well, you can be sure, Jim, that the law enforcement agency of this government en masse are taking every effort possible to find this assassin. Director J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI telephoned the Dallas FBI office and ordered them to conduct an all-out investigation of the murder and the attempt on the lives of others in the presidential party.
And can you give us some background on Mr. Johnson, who now at the age of 55 becomes the 36th president of the United States?
Well, the new president has something in common with the late president. Johnson also served in the Navy, as President Kennedy did. He volunteered for active duty in the Navy when he was a congressman a few days after Pearl Harbor. He was called back sometime later when President Roosevelt called all congressmen back to Washington, and he now is a commander in the Naval Reserve. President Johnson got his political beginnings under the wing of the late Franklin D. Roosevelt. President Roosevelt took an interest in him when Johnson was a congressional aide up here in Capitol Hill, and he encouraged him to make a race for the Senate, which Johnson lost at that time, later to win another race to the Senate. In general, the new president's philosophy stems from his association with the New Deal and that era. He's considered fairly liberal on certain points and conservative on others. However, he is credited with shepherding through the Senate the first civil rights bill to be enacted by Congress in 80 years. That was the 1957 Civil Rights Bill. But generally, he would take a middle-of-the-road attitude on major issues.
Well, Ann, in your experience in Washington, you knew Mr. Johnson when he was a comparatively young man in the early stages of his Washington career. Didn't he start out as a school teacher before he even came to Washington?
Yes, he did teach school for a while. Incidentally, he worked his way through college, doing all sorts of jobs like handyman, sweeping out the corridors and such as that.
And his first assignment in Washington was not as a member of Congress.
He first came here as a secretary to a congressman from Texas, but he did take a job that President Roosevelt offered him as director of the National Youth Administration. And he served several years in that job until he himself ran for Congress in 1937.
Now, we all know that Mr. Johnson did not feel that the vice presidency was the end of his political career, and that he considered himself a presidential possibility for 1968. I wonder, of course we can't know this, but from what you know of his personality and his drive, once he gets over his original shock at what has happened today and being catapulted into the presidency, how do you think he would approach the job in the White House?
I think he will approach it very seriously with all respect for the office and the responsibility that it carries with it. He will be a very good administrator. Lyndon Johnson is an excellent organizer. He believes in organization. He has a great deal of drive, as everyone knows. When he was majority leader of the Senate, he was regarded as one of the smoothest operators insofar as arranging legislative schedules and legislative votes that the Senate had ever seen. In fact, he has been criticized on that score. But he did conduct an orderly legislative schedule when he was in the Senate.
You know, part of the reaction here in Washington today includes bitterness. For example, Senator Clinton Anderson, Democrat of New Mexico, says the president probably should not have gone to Dallas. Anderson said, when they shoved Lyndon Johnson around in 1960, when they spat on Adlai Stevenson, I suppose it indicated the temper of the place. The reference to Mr. Johnson being shoved around in 1960 is to an incident that occurred during the 1960 presidential campaign when Mr. Johnson was campaigning as the Democratic vice presidential candidate. I recall it was at a hotel in Dallas, and he and his wife, Lady Bird as she is known, arrived at this hotel and were heckled by a group of people, Republicans, I assume. And there was quite a bit of dismay here in Washington because a Texas Republican Congressman, Bruce Alger, was in the group. And the group became very unruly, and it was touch and go there for a while whether or not Mr. Johnson and his wife would be able to get into the hotel without being bruised or knocked off their feet or something. However, Mr. Johnson stayed calm, if not rather irate in such a situation, and it did not become as dangerous as some people thought it might.
One thing I might mention, Jim, is there had been many rumors in Washington in the last few years that President Kennedy was not paying enough attention to Lyndon Johnson and that he was trying to downgrade him. But these stories were generally not believed. The president gave Mr. Johnson many major important assignments in the field of equal opportunity and jobs and housing, and made him chairman of the Space Council. He sat in on cabinet meetings and was called to the White House for practically every major decision that was made in any situation of a crisis nature, such as the Cuban crisis.
We have word of the doctor's report from Dallas, the official doctor's report on exactly what happened to Mr. Kennedy. According to United Press, President Kennedy was shot through the throat and head, possibly by the same bullet, the attending surgeon said today. Dr. Malcolm Perry, 34 years old, said, "There was an entrance wound below his Adam's apple. There was another wound in the back of his head." 2 of the 10 doctors in attendance on the president said it was possible that one bullet entered the throat and went through the back of the president's head. It was possible, they said, that he was hit by 2 bullets, but they doubted it. The president's throat was open to relieve breathing. Blood and fluids were administered intravenously. The doctors labored to keep respiration at a life-sustaining level. However, their labors were, of course, in vain, and they were working against time, because the president was shot at 12:30 Dallas time, and he died at 1 o'clock Dallas time. As we've said, there has been much reaction here in Washington. This is a very sad city indeed today. And I'd like to repeat one of the bits of reaction from a member of the United States Senate. This is a statement issued by Senator Hugh Scott, Republican of Pennsylvania. It reads, "The whole nation shares the grief of the family of John F. Kennedy in the assassination of the president. John Kennedy served his country well and died in its service. Our hearts are heavy and our heads are bowed. Our love and sympathy encompass his bereaved family. We have lost a leader and a friend. The Republic still stands. The assassin killed a man, not the presidency. We must all rally around the new President of the United States in this time of national crisis and pray for the health, strength, and well-being of President Lyndon B. Johnson. We must give him our understanding and help." That statement from Senator Hugh Scott, Republican of Pennsylvania. Repeating, Lyndon Johnson became the 36th President of the United States at 2:38 Eastern Standard Time this afternoon when he was sworn in as President in Dallas. You might be interested in the oath that Mr. Johnson took as he was sworn in. The oath reads, "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." So that's the story on this very dark day in the history of the United States. President John F. Kennedy died of an assassin's bullet at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon in Dallas, Texas. 38 minutes later, Lyndon Baines Johnson, age 55, was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States. This is Jim Snyder with Ann Corig in Washington.
They only have room for 2 pullers. For 3 pullers, and me and Chuck Roberts are going to have to flip to see who goes.
Yeah.
But Mrs. Kennedy is going back with it. Now, should I flip them or stay here?
Stay there.
In Dallas.
Right.
All right, then I'll tell Roberts he goes.
Just a minute, Sid.
Once, Jim.
Yeah, Sid, stay there.
Jim?
Yeah.
Put this on the air. Do you have a line open?
What do you got?
The Vice President will be sworn in just a few minutes. I believe it's going to take place right on the jet.
Okay, now look, Sid, can you stand by there till I do an intro on the line?
I don't have a hell of a lot of time. It'll have to be about a 1-minute story.
Okay, hold on. Station standby. Jim Snyder will be coming up very, very quickly. Attention, Jim Snyder coming up very quickly. He only has a little bit of time. We'll take it live from here. Give me a level, Sid. Give me a quick level.
Hello, 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 hello.
Give me a quick level.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
You got 15 seconds to go, Sid. 15 seconds.
5 seconds from...
Do you hear that?
Right.
Okay, Sid. Go!
This is Sid Davis reporting from the Dallas airport, where 3 hours ago the scene was gaiety as President and Mrs. Kennedy got off a glistening Air Force airplane to meet a crowd of well-wishers. 3 hours later now, the scene is utter tragedy. Aboard the plane, in a solid bronze casket, is the President. And Mrs. Kennedy is aboard the plane, which will be departing for Washington very shortly with the President's body. White House staff people are also aboard, and we are told that the Vice President will be sworn in as President within a few minutes. This is Sid Davis with this information from the Dallas airport in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
President John F. Kennedy is dead, and the people of Dallas are asking themselves why. It was a sniper's bullet that killed the president, while a crowd in the thousands welcomed him and his wife to town. But Dallas has a recent history of hostility toward members of the Kennedy administration. When Lyndon Johnson and his wife came campaigning in 1960, a rowdy group of Republicans roughed them up in a hotel lobby and held them in a corner. A few weeks ago, a woman demonstrator's placard struck Adlai Stevenson on the head, and another Stevenson critic spat in the ambassador's face. Today, as the presidential motorcade rode into town under a bright Texas sun and a blue sky, some might have recalled those incidents, but few here believe the tragedy that has come would happen. President Kennedy died of a bullet wound of the brain, said the terse announcement to reporters. Associate News Secretary Malcolm Kilduff couldn't hold back the tears when he announced, "John F. Kennedy is dead." Fighting emotion, Kilduff, speaking from a hurriedly set-up press room in Parkland Hospital, said, "Death came at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time." 1 hour and 39 minutes later, the machinery of this government elevated Lyndon Johnson to the nation's highest office. It was a solemn, simple ceremony in the presidential compartment of Air Force One, the big plane that only 3 hours before had brought a smiling president and his wife to Dallas. Shocked beyond belief, Mrs. Kennedy, her left leg and stocking soaked with the blood of her husband, stood to the vice president's left. Mrs. Johnson was on his right as a U.S. District Judge, Sarah Hughes, appointed to the Texas federal courts by President Kennedy, administered the oath of office to the new president. The 67-year-old judge's eyes were wet. Johnson embraced both Mrs. Kennedy and his wife after the 30-second ceremony, then said solemnly, "Let's get this plane back to Washington." After I watched this sad meeting, the plane carrying Mrs. Kennedy, her husband's body, and President Johnson took off for Washington. The headline in tonight's Dallas papers blare, "President Kennedy is dead." As I walked toward the airport, a man said to me, "This country is sick. Maybe this will shake it up." This is Sid Davis reporting from Dallas.
10 seconds from Mark. 5 seconds.
No one could ever have conceived that the plush and comfortable reception lounge aboard the presidential jet would be used to swear in a new president of the United States, or that the plane would ever be used to carry a president's body from such a nightmarish incident. To one who experienced the day's events in Dallas, they remained bewildering, but they did occur, and no one can change what took place. At 2:30 Dallas time, some 27 persons, including this reporter, were gathered in the lounge compartment. Vice President Johnson asked for a tall glass of ice water. A minute or so later, a tray with ice water was brought in for him. Only 90 minutes before, he and President Kennedy were in a motorcade heading for a luncheon appearance. Now the whole picture was changed. On the Vice President's left was Mrs. Johnson. At 2:35, Mrs. Kennedy, looking worn, entered the compartment. Everything became silent. Her bright raspberry-colored suit was blood-stained. Her left leg was covered with dried blood from the President's mortal wound. Mrs. Kennedy took her place to the Vice President's left. Judge Sarah Hughes, quickly summoned from her district post in Dallas, administered the oath. She asked the Vice President to raise his right hand. The Vice President placed his left hand on a Bible that had been aboard the plane. In 30 seconds, the oath was finished. President Johnson turned, embraced Mrs. Kennedy, his wife, and Evelyn Lincoln, President Kennedy's secretary. Softly but sternly, out of concern for Mrs. Kennedy and the Kennedy family, he said, "Let's get this plane back to Washington." It was 2:39 p.m. Central Standard Time. At 2:45 p.m., the plane was off the runway and speeding to the Capitol. This is Sid Davis reporting from the White House. The body of President Kennedy will be brought to the White House sometime during the night. It is being prepared at the Bethesda Naval Hospital by a local Washington funeral director. The time of its arrival has not been announced, but an honor guard will line the northwest grounds of the White House when the casket is brought in for placement in the East Room. There, a special honor guard will maintain a 24-hour vigil. Mrs. Kennedy is spending the night at the Naval Hospital. She will return to the White House in the morning. The two Kennedy children, John Jr. and Caroline, apparently have not been told of their father's death. When they were taken from the White House earlier in the evening, the White House indicated then that they did not know about the tragedy. The latest word is that the situation is still the same. The presidential casket will lie in the East Room on a catafalque, a platform similar to the one used for President Lincoln. 4 candles, 2 on either side, will remain lighted while the body rests in the White House, and 2 Roman Catholic priests will offer prayers during their all-night vigil over the president's remains. The Kennedy family has expressed the desire that no flowers be sent to the White House or the burial. Instead, they request that equal donations be made to charity. Outside the White House, Washington residents are paying silent respect. Long lines of people still peer through the iron gate on this chilly, unbelievable night. Their faces express bewilderment, curiosity, and sadness. This is Sid Davis reporting from the White House.
Chicago's Mayor Richard Daley, a close personal friend of the late President Kennedy, went into seclusion tonight. Grieving over the loss of the president, the mayor was reported to have immediately burst into tears and retired to his home. He issued this statement: "I cannot express my deep grief and sorrow over the tragic death of President John F. Kennedy. He was a great president, a great leader. The people of Chicago had many occasions to see and hear this great young American, and his vital spirit, sincerity, and warm personality have given us all a memory that we will cherish and never forget. As mayor of Chicago, speaking for the people of our city, I express my heartfelt condolences to his wife and family." Chicago's Mayor Richard Daley on the death of his close personal and political friend, John F. Kennedy. Rod Lowe in Chicago.
Grief-stricken Mrs. Kennedy has yet another tragic task to perform when she returns to the White House. She must tell her 2 children what happened to their father. John Jr., whom his father lovingly called John, will be 3 years old on Monday. Caroline will be 6 on Wednesday. Gay birthday celebrations had been planned for them at the White House and at Cape Cod, where the Kennedy clan was to gather for their traditional family Thanksgiving next week. Both the children were at the White House in the care of their nurse when the president was assassinated in Dallas. Senator Edward Kennedy, the president's brother, their sister Eunice Shriver, and her husband went to the White House shortly after they received the news. Sergeant Shriver remained with the children, but the others flew to Cape Cod to be with their parents, Mrs. Rose Kennedy and former Ambassador Joseph Kennedy, who suffered a stroke in December of 1961. The burden of grief on Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy at this moment is incredible. Only last August she lost her infant son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, who died 2 days after he was born. At that time, it was the president who took Caroline and John aside and told them of the family tragedy. Ann Corick in Washington.
There's very little more we can say. In a manner of speaking, perhaps John F. Kennedy has come home. I think one of the things that might be appropriate at this time, he liked to quote from Robert Frost many times on the campaign, but one of the president's favorite quotations, and I believe it went something like this: "I have promises to keep and many miles to go before I sleep." And with that, this is Sid Davis reporting from the White House.